This is the insane story of a woman who was stolen from her home, not to work, but literally for her body. They turned her into a public spectacle, and her life and death became a crazy symbol of greed and scientific cruelty. I want you to picture this. It's 19th century London, and people are paying money to stare at and even poke a young African woman in a cage. They called her the Hottentot Venus, and her entire life was basically a freak show. But what happened when the show ended was even crazier. For scientists, the real horror was just getting started. This is the unbelievable story of Sarah Baartman. Before all this craziness, she was a real person named Sarah Baartman. She was born around 1789 in what is now South Africa, a member of the Khoikhoi community. Her home was this beautiful valley, but it was being torn apart by colonialism. Her childhood was insane. Her mom died when she was a toddler. Her dad was killed. She got married, had a kid, but the baby died. Then her husband was murdered by Dutch colonists. In just a few years, she lost literally everyone. All alone, she ended up working for a guy named Pieter Willem Keizer, who took her to Cape Town. It looked like this was her new life, but then Keizer's brother Hendrik and a British doctor named William Dunlop saw her. They didn't see a human being. They saw dollar signs. They looked at her body, specifically her pronounced buttocks, a natural genetic trait for some Khoisan women, and thought, we can make so much money off this in Europe. They saw a product, not a person. So in 1810, these two guys made Sarah an insane offer. They told her, come to London and you'll get rich. They even made a contract, but it was just a piece of paper with words she couldn't even read. It promised her a cut of the profits and a ticket home in 5 years. For someone who had lost everything, this must have sounded like winning the lottery. But it was all a complete lie. The contract was a total scam, made to look like she agreed to something she couldn't possibly understand. So at just 21 years old, Sarah gets on a ship, thinking she's going to get famous and rich. In reality, she was sailing straight into a nightmare. She wasn't a passenger, she was cargo, transported across the ocean just to be exploited. The promises were a cruel trick that sealed her fate. She would never see her home again. The second she gets to London, they take her to Piccadilly Circus, basically the Times Square of its day. They put up posters for the Hottentot Venus, a super offensive name they made up. And the show was an instant, twisted hit. For a fee, Londoners could go in and see Sarah on a platform, sometimes in an actual cage, wearing next to nothing. Her keeper, Hendrik Keizer, would literally order her around like an animal. For extra money, people could poke her. It was disgusting. This got the attention of abolitionists, who were like, this is slavery. And they sued Keizer. But get this, when they put Sarah on the stand, what could she do? She's in a foreign country, totally dependent on the guys who put her there. She told the court she wasn't being held there against her will. The case completely fell apart. The court's decision basically trapped her legally in this nightmare. She fought back in small ways, often refusing to cooperate with her handlers, but it wasn't enough to get her free. Just when you think it can't get worse, it does. In 1814, Keizer passed her on to a man named Rowe, an animal trainer in Paris. I'm not kidding, an animal trainer. In London, they treated her like a weird creature. In Paris, they put her on display with actual animals. He forced her into performing at sketchy parties, where the line between a show and sexual abuse got completely erased. Life in Paris was a living hell. It's believed she was forced into prostitution, her body available for more than just public staring. The city that called itself civilized showed her its absolute worst side. And that's when France's top scientists showed up. Men like Georges Cuvier, a famous scientist, saw her and didn't see a person. He saw the ultimate scientific prize. They wanted to measure and dissect her, to prove their insane racist theories. She said no to their invasive exams, holding on to the last bit of dignity she had. But they didn't care. They just decided to wait for her to die. On December 29th, 1815, Sarah Baartman died. She was only 26 years old. The cause was some kind of disease from the horrible way she was forced to live. She died poor and alone, an ocean away from home. But even in death, they wouldn't leave her body alone. That scientist, Georges Cuvier, was literally waiting for it. He immediately got his hands on her corpse for dissection, but this wasn't a normal autopsy. This was a twisted experiment to prove his racist ideas. Cuvier wanted to use her body to prove that African people were less evolved than Europeans. Basically, that they were closer to apes. It's insane. He obsessed over her brain, her buttocks, and her genitals, and wrote about his findings in a book about mammals, where Sarah was the only human being. The craziest part. In his own notes, Cuvier wrote that she was smart and had a great memory, but he still published that she was more like an ape. He used her body as a weapon against her own people. And then came the final, unbelievable insult. Cuvier didn't bury her. Instead, he put her on display. He made a plaster cast of her entire body, pickled her brain and genitals in jars, and put her skeleton, the cast, and the jars in a museum in Paris. For over 150 years, until 1974, people walked past the remains of Sarah Baartman like she was a dinosaur fossil. Generations of people gawked at this woman who had been tortured her whole life. Her suffering turned into a permanent exhibit. And even when they finally took her off display, they just threw her in a storage closet. Still just an object, not a person. This story should have ended in that dark museum closet, but it didn't. In 1994, after apartheid fell in South Africa, the brand new president, Nelson Mandela, personally asked France to send Sarah home. The request was led by the Khoikhoi community, her people. For them, bringing her home was about giving dignity back to her and to everyone who suffered like she did. But it wasn't easy. For years, France said no, claiming her body was inalienable property of the museum. Can you believe that? They were literally claiming they owned her remains. The fight lasted for 8 years, powered by activists and an amazing poem that helped change everyone's mind. Finally, in 2002, France agreed. On May 3rd, 2002, almost 200 years after she was taken, Sarah Baartman was finally on a plane back to South Africa. On August 9th, 2002, on South Africa's National Women's Day, Sarah Baartman was finally buried. Thousands of people showed up on a hill near where she was born. She was buried with her people's traditions, with a memorial that said her dignity had been restored. Today, nobody calls her the Hottentot Venus. She's this incredible symbol of the fight against racism, colonialism, and violence against women. Her story is an insane reminder of how people can be treated, but her legacy is now about being a fighter. She is remembered as a woman who survived the absolute worst, and whose battle for dignity kept going even after she died. Sarah Baartman is finally home, but her story is something every single one of us needs to hear. If you think this story is important, smash that subscribe button for more insane stories from history that you absolutely need to know. Seriously, remembering this stuff is the only way we don't repeat it. Sarah Baartman's life was an absolute tragedy. Every single step was exploitation. Her body was literally a battleground for all the racist and sexist ideas of the 19th century. But the fact that people fought to bring her home, and that she was finally buried where she belongs, is an incredible win. A win for remembering over forgetting, and a win for human dignity over pure evil.